Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America. When it's working, a family business is a dream come true. To watch your children succeed in your company is the greatest joy. But family in your business often means navigating minefields everywhere. Help, I've Got Family in the Business by Hugh Roberts shares real-life stories of successes to be followed and failures to be avoided. Hugh has worked nationwide for over 40 years with high-net-worth family business owners, their families and management teams to provide solutions to challenging issues which often derail succession legacies. A partner with Rawls Group, Hugh has delivered seminars to over 70 automotive 20 groups, multiple state and national industry associations, plus 10 National Auto Dealer Association national conventions. Hugh has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Colorado, a Master's in Youth Ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary, and a Certified Financial Planner and a Certified Succession Planner. Hugh B. Roberts, author of Help, I've Got Family in the Business, is our guest on This Week in America. Hugh, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Rick. It's good to be here.
Let's talk about the book, a fascinating read, and everybody wants to have a business. In fact, there's 60% of business owners are small business, a family business. Everybody wants the family to succeed, to be there, to take over the family business. Doesn't always work. What was the inspiration for you in writing this book?
Well, I've had a lifelong passion to help families succeed in the business. For the last 40 years or so, I've been committed to helping business owners fulfill their dream of their legacy carrying forward through their children. And all too often, unfortunately, that dream becomes a nightmare. And everything blows up in their face and they're going, what do I do? How do I solve this?
Yes.
Is there any hope? Is there any answers? And I wrote the book because a lot of people have been where they're going. We've been there. There is hope. There are answers.
And the book is available wherever books are sold. If you go to our website, you can link on directly to Amazon and get information on the book. Order the book there as well. Our guest is Hugh B. Roberts. The book is available wherever books are sold. Help, I've Got Family in the Business. Why do dreams become nightmares for the owners of family businesses?
Well, lots of reasons. I've identified 10 what I call time bombs that impact family businesses, turning those dreams to nightmares. Some examples might be, why won't my children work as hard as I do? Well, Dad, that's all you did. I'm not about to do that. I'm not about to affect my family the way you affected mine. I worked smarter, not harder. Well, I think of one guy, he's in his 80s and he's just, he's been phenomenally successful. He's there every day, including Saturdays. He can't figure out why his kids aren't there on Saturdays. And they're looking at it and saying, you know what, that's what your generation did. But we're just as successful and we can do it working smarter, not working as hard as you did. Another one was, Dad, you had it easy. Easy? What are you talking about, you little jerk? I grew up with an alcoholic father, died when I was 12. We grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I had to scrape for everything I got. What are you talking about, easy? Well, Dad, you had it easy because you started at the bottom. Every single thing you did was a success. My brothers and sisters and I, we have to start at the top. And you know what? The gal was right. It is tougher in some ways to start at the top and then be compared, et cetera. And you're always being compared to this giant figure. I happen to have the pleasure of sitting next to Julius Erving, Dr. J, one of the greatest basketball players that ever lived. He was the Michael Jordan of his era. He was the Kobe Bryant of his era. He was phenomenal. And so in the course of the conversation, I said to him, must be tough being your kid. He looked at me like, what are you talking about? I'm a good guy. And I said, must be tough. There's only one Dr. J. You've set a really, really high bar for your kids. How in the world can they possibly compete with that? And an awful lot of kids in family businesses feel the very same way. Their parents are the titans of industry, the lords and masters of their community. They are so successful and have reached such high pinnacles of success. How can I possibly compete with that? So there's a whole bunch of reasons here that whether it's differences in generations, whether it's sibling rivalry, whether it's estate planning issues, whether it's you know, my father won't let go. I mean, there's just a whole bunch
Yes.
of these things that I've tried to elaborate more fully in my book.
The book is called, and it's available wherever books are sold, Help, I've Got Family in the Business by Hugh Roberts. Book available, again, wherever books are sold. A direct link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Out of the time bombs that you listened that negatively impact family businesses, what is the most dangerous? What is the one that really, really creates havoc in terms of family succession?
I think far and away the hardest one for us to deal with is entitlement. One business owner said very eloquently, he said, when you see a turtle on top of a fence post, it didn't get there by itself. Somebody had to put it there. I caused my kid to feel entitled, and because of that, I'm going to have to deal with it. Well, I really appreciated that client and his perspective, because he realized that he had been the one who made it too easy for his kid, who basically undermined that child's ability to be successful. Because you can give your child a job, you can give them a paycheck, you can give them a title. But the one thing you can't give them is respect. They have to earn that on their own. And if they don't, there's just no way in the world they're going to be successful. And so often it is the business owner who's the problem. They do, we often say they're either too tough or too easy on their kids. But entitlement usually comes from being too easy. It's things like paying them too much. Why? Well, because mom wants them to live in the neighborhood with us, et cetera, wants them to go to the best schools, et cetera. We promote them way too quickly. They take the elevator to the top when they need to take the stairs. We excuse behavior. There's no accountability. There's a fear that if I hold them accountable, somehow I'm going to mess up the family relationships, and that's not going to work. I think of this one client who had a phenomenally successful business, consistently making millions and millions of dollars, et cetera. And then one day he brought his son into the business, and he did all the classic things that you shouldn't do. He promoted this son way too quickly. He gave him authority he hadn't earned. He didn't know what he was doing. He allowed him to run ramshot over employees that had been there for years. And finally, the person who was probably most responsible for the success of that business said, I've had enough. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. I'm not staying. And he left, and guess what he did? He went down the road and started working for a competitor. Didn't take him very long till he started attracting away and had recruited away all the really key people who had made from the original organization into the new organization. And before long, this thing was a disaster. So what had happened? You had a whole bunch of issues that are interrelated and interconnected that caused this disaster to happen. You had a father, in terms of family dynamics, not willing to really deal with his son. You had a successor as a result who was not prepared at all and was creating all kinds of management problems. As a result, profitability went in the tank, and the ultimate result of that, succession is not going to happen.
Why is it so difficult to communicate with our children? And do you see that as being one of the major problems that impacts business in a negative way?
Well, let's face it. Our children are different. All you got to do. I have two wonderful children. They've got children of their own, and I love them to death. They're great people, but they're different than I am. They think some certain things differently. They see the world a little bit differently. Their music is different, definitely different than mine. But I think of one particular client, and in his situation, the father was the consummate salesman, very relational, very engaging with his people, et cetera. He brought his son into the business, and the son had great background. He was a CPA with a very large CPA firm, wonderfully educated, very, very sharp, but very different from dad. He was an introvert. And in fact, when they built their huge complex, et cetera, he made sure that the office building was about 100 feet behind the main sales portion of their business, et cetera. And he put his office upstairs at the back of that building, and his door was shut most of the time. What's he telling you? I'm not a people guy.
Yes.
I'm not like dad. Drove his dad crazy, just crazy. How in the world can you be involved in our business and not be engaged with the people? Well, the truth was his son was a much better businessman than his father. And during his father's lifetime, the son took the business to 10 times the size it had been under his father. But he did it differently. And he brought in people who could do the things that he didn't want to do, and he ran it very, very effectively. But his dad literally went to his grave thinking, somehow this isn't going to work, etc. Well, just to show you that God has a sense of humor, along comes generation 3, the grandson. And guess who he's like? Yeah, he's like grandpa. And again, we went through this whole deal in terms of how do we help them communicate with each other. And the father's comment was, he said, the last thing I want to do is to struggle the way my dad and I struggled. I want my son and I to be on a better level. And so we worked very hard to help them communicate and set expectations and work through things because they were so different. Remember, differences aren't necessarily a problem. In fact, often the differences are complementary, that you can work very effectively together, which my partner and I here in my business, he's very different. He's very organized. He's much more of a strategist, task focused, et cetera, than I am. But if we don't drive each other crazy, we're phenomenally successful. So we've had to work hard at that whole communication process.
With us on the program is Hugh B. Roberts. The book is Help, I've Got Family in the Business. I quoted before, 60% of the business in the country, the backbone of the company, are family businesses, yet only 30% successfully transition to the second generation, and the odds of passing it down to the third generation drop to just 12%. The fourth down and down from there, 3%. So you see this gradual decline as one generation comes in and takes over for the other. You've got equal is not fair, fair is not equal. Can you expand a little bit on how family business owners should divide the assets without creating resentment? That's another main area, a time bomb there, that you've got to distribute the money. Some think maybe it should be equal. Others think, no, it should be merit-based. How do you deal with that?
Sure. I like to think of this as sort of the Christmas syndrome that we've probably all experienced at one time or another. You get close to Christmas and all of a sudden, mom and dad are laying out the gifts on a
Yes.
table or on a bed or whatever. And let's see, I got 2 for Johnny, I got 3 for Susan, but wait a minute, the 3 for Susan, or the 2 for, they cost more than the 3. And we start driving ourselves crazy. Maybe I better go get one more because I want to make sure that when we look under the tree that they're going to open the same number.
Yep, done that.
Yeah, we've all done it. We've all done it. And unfortunately, we take the same approach into estate planning, and particularly when you own a business. That's a recipe for disaster. So there's only one, actually 2 ways to be equal. One is to have 1 kid. For most of us, that ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're already stuck with more than one. We got to solve that. The other one is we're going to sell everything off. Get a big stack of coins, and 1 to you, 1 to you, 1 to you, 1 to you. Well, again, we're not going to do that. Why? Because we built this business. We've got this real estate. We've got assets that are very important to the ongoing succession of our family business, et cetera. So now we've got to solve this problem. And we often have that problem of some kids are involved in the business and some that aren't. How are we going to deal with that? I think the first thing that is most important is to use the word meaningful. Are the assets that I'm going to give to each child, are they meaningful to them? And typically that means income producing. If you're working in the business, then the assets that you've been given, as you run the business, you create dollars, you have opportunity to get dollars, that's meaningful to you. Okay. On the other hand, if you're not involved in the business and you receive stock in the business, it can be anything but meaningful. For instance, a classic example of one situation, there were 4 kids in the business. 4 kids in the family, 3 that were in the business and 1 that wasn't. Well, I said to the father, if he was adamant about wanting it to be equal. And I said, well, if you do that, I can tell you what's going to happen about 9 months later, after you and your wife are gone, your child's going to show up and he's going to say to the others, boy, you guys are doing a great job. Mom and Dad be so proud of you. So when do I get my money? What are you talking about? Well, when I get money, I own 1/4 of this whole thing. Well, yeah, but you don't work here. Well, so, when do I get paid? Well, you don't. What do you mean? You're getting paid. Well, we work here. Well, okay. So when do I get something for mine? Well, when we sell. Well, when are we going to sell? Well, we're not. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, and by the way, you owe the tax on the portion that you've got. So the point here is that what they own 1/4 in that example, but that doesn't mean they're going to get anything for it if there's no distributions, and that often happens. Or, I mean, you can get very, very hung up in family disaster in that kind of situation. So it's really important that they get assets that are meaningful to them. And I like to say to the parent, there's two parts of that that are crucial. One is when you give assets to the child that's active in the business, you're giving them the right and opportunity to go to work. When you give assets to a child that's not involved in the business, you give them the opportunity to go to the beach. A big difference.
Yes.
Okay. Huge difference. And the other thing you got to understand is when you were running the business as mom and dad, you had all the assets. You had the cash, you had the stock, you had the real estate, you had all the assets that you could leverage in order to run your business successfully. Now you're going to divide those up, and maybe they're going to get, I think of one family where there's 5 kids. There's 2 that aren't involved, there's 3 that are. Now the 3 that are involved in the business, they're going to have 3/5 of the assets, but they got to run the whole thing. So you've got to pay attention to the demands that those children who are in the business are going to have to face, because if you don't, you're setting them up for disaster, or at the very least of saying, wait a minute, I'm doing all the work and I'm just paying out dollars to my brother and sister who aren't doing a thing. You talk about a recipe for creating family disharmony. That's the last thing your parents want.
Well, let's talk about sibling partnerships. And you're touching on that. Why they work, why they don't work. When they work, when they're successful, what have they done? What groundwork have they laid that prepares them for a successful partnership?
Sure. Well, the first question I ask in any situation like that is, will your sibling choose you to be their partner if you weren't related? And if you think about it, every partnership, whether it's a personal partnership or a business partnership, a marriage is a form of partnership.
Yes.
Okay. I chose Lisa, Lisa chose me, and we continue to choose each other. And that's why it works. Okay. My partner here in the office, Jeff, is not related to me. I chose him, he chose me. We continue to choose each other, therefore it works. The problem in a family business is mom and dad give you your partners and say, make it work. And that doesn't necessarily all add up to a winning recipe. But the bottom line principle there is the same thing applies. Sooner or later, you've got to get to the point where the brother says, I choose my sister to be, or the sister says, I choose my sister to be involved. The siblings have got to choose each other and say, absolutely, I want my sibling to be my partner. So the question is, are you, to each individual, are you doing what you need to do so that your sibling would choose you? And if you're not, this thing is not going to work. I think of one family where the brothers are about 12 years apart in age, and the younger child was 10 years later in coming into the business. And they were very different. One very relational, the other guy very strategic, very financially oriented, structure, organization, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the older brother recognized that his younger brother, with all of his relational skills, could bring an awful lot to the table that would help their business, et cetera. And recognizing that, he said, we need to work through this to make it work. So we went through a whole process of, and I'll simplify it. Number one, they committed to meeting on a weekly basis. They go away for an hour. They lock they shut off the world. They turn off their phones. They really focus in on each other and the issues at hand. They are paying attention to the fact that their relationship is the most crucial one for the long-term success of the business. And then we sat down and we worked through clarifying what they expected of each other, writing them down. We talk about that as being covenants, operating covenants. And it basically comes off of the whole biblical idea of covenants between
Yes.
God and Abraham. God and Abraham clearly not equals, but God basically said to Abraham, if you will do these things, I will do these things. Okay. There was a comfort that Abraham knew that God was going to do these things, and he knew clearly what was expected of him. Same thing with these two brothers. And then I think of one other set of brothers that are much older. And I said to him, you guys have been partners now for 40 years. And they were two very, very strong individuals. I mean, it was almost scary at times to be in the room with them because when they started arguing with each other, boy, they went at it. And yet they would leave there, and it was amazing how well they functioned. So I said to them, how'd you guys make it work? And he said, it was very clear to us years ago that it was okay for us to argue over something and work through it and really struggle to come to a conclusion. But we did that in private. And once we left the private room and went into the public arena, then it was our decision. We had bought into it. We had committed to it together. If it succeeded, we won together. We cheered together. If it failed, we failed together, and we together were going to work through and find a solution. We never said, I told you so. In that kind of environment, you can have a partnership that's really going to work effectively for the sake of both the family and the business.
What do you do when a business owner is aware that one child is more capable, maybe more committed than the other child in running the business? How do you recommend they deal with a situation like that? Because one is going to be sort of anointed and the other one is not, but the business owner understands there's a difference in these kids.
Yeah, you bet. And let's face it, I don't care. Your kids are different. They may be different in terms of style. They may be different in terms of commitment and work ethic. And there's so many factors here that come into play. And so when you get in this situation, and the classic tendency is to want to make them, I got 2 children, I want to make them 50-50 partners. And the truth is, you can't run a family like a business, and you can't run a business like a family. You may love them both. You may want the very best for each of them, and we need to do everything we can to help each of them become the best version of themselves. Okay, but if one of them is chosen to do less, to not get as prepared, to not get as educated, to not be as committed, to not be willing to work as hard, or simply doesn't want to, or doesn't have the talent to, or whatever, then you can't treat them the same. In other words, you can't have one that plays in the major leagues and one that plays in the little leagues and hope that somehow they're going to come together and work. So we have to, in that environment, one of the things we try and do is lay out what's expected, making sure that they can self-select the level that they're going to get to. Love to have you here. Love to have you be involved. And remember, they don't have to be equal in terms of their talents, but they have to be meaningfully contributing. On a baseball team, it would be very boring game if all you had was pitchers. Okay.
Yes.
So you need to have people of varying skill sets, et cetera, but they all have to be able to play at the major league level in terms of commitments and ability to impact the business. Otherwise, you've got to understand and make those tough calls that says, this is the person who has done what they need to do to go forward, and we're going to anoint them at a level the other person might be involved, but clearly not be on the same level. Tough decisions.
Yes. Hugh's book is Help. I've got Family in the Business. Hugh Roberts, book available wherever books are sold. You'll find a link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Take you to the Amazon page for Hugh's book. His website is seekingsuccession.com. All of this, of course, on our website. How do you handle a situation where a business owner really struggles to let go? And he's probably there a little bit too long, or his family members who are about to take over think he's been there too long. How do you work out that transition so it's smooth from both vantage points?
Well, let's face it, that's another tough one.
Yes.
Because most of the family business owners that I've ever been involved with, they just really love what they do.
Yes.
They don't want to retire. I mean, pinochle and golf, I'm sorry, that's not what I want to do. Okay. So one of the things they have to do is understand and take a really good look at themselves in the mirror. And they have to say to themselves, what kind of a person am I? Can I let go partially? Am I a micromanager, for instance? I think of one guy who's very strong, very dominant, very controlling, and he knows that about himself. And so he said, I have to literally disappear for lengthy periods of time. So he literally is out of the office, living in another state for months at a time, just because he knows that otherwise his kids will never have a chance to grow and develop. Other guys, though, take it a little bit differently. They understand that they've got to share the limelight. They've got to. They don't have to necessarily leave, but they might take on different roles. One guy said, I'm going to become the director of acquisitions because he loved that part of the business. So, and what I'm saying there is to find a place in the business where you can contribute and yet not step on your kids' toes. And I like to use my partner, the founder of the Rawls Group, Lloyd Rawls, as a great example of a guy who, if anybody understood the problems of succession, et cetera, he did. He's got his kids involved in the business. He's got multiple partners in the business, et cetera. How is he going to transition it? So I look at what he did and said, this was a great model. First of all, he transferred his day-to-day decision-making to a successor. And in his particular case, even though he had 3 children in the business, the most appropriate person to run it at this stage of the game was a non-family member, Dave Ciambella. And so Dave's in that position. We like to call that a succession bridge. Sometimes that lasts longer. Sometimes it's a short period of time until the next generation is ready. But in any case, the right person has to be put in the job, not just somebody who has the right name. And then you really need to support your successor's decisions publicly. As we said, that's critical. Redefining your role and that of the successor, making sure we have clear expectations of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, et cetera. And then meeting regularly. Communicate some more. In other words, if you don't get in the room and communicate on a regular basis, assumptions are going to happen. Things are going to come into play. They're going to create all kinds of problems. Give the benefit of the doubt. We are going to screw up. We are human. There's going to be a need to forgive and move on, et cetera. Again, I go back to determine what part of the business that you love and make sure that you can continue to add value so people will want you there. And then be a cheerleader. Encourage your successor. Back him or her up so that they know that having you around is a good thing, not a bad thing. And under those circumstances, I believe that the Rawls Group has a very good chance. We're now in our 53rd year of seeing 100 years because we're committed to making these kind of transitions from generation to generation.
Few minutes left. Well, the time is going quickly, but I want to talk about generational differences. What happens? Younger workers come in and they talk about work-life balance, something that the founding member of the family 30, 40 years ago didn't think of. That's something I need to be there to make this work. We're open 6 days a week. I'm going to be there 6 days a week. How do you juggle that? It's a whole generational thing there.
Sure is. It sure is. And older generations, let's face it, have a tendency to feel if I'm not there, somehow I'm not being responsible.
Yes.
And the younger generation is going to be much more focused on performance. In most businesses, the good news is there's a bottom line that you can check. And so assuming that your child is doing the things that create the bottom line and does so in an ethical way, continuing the culture, the makeup, that type of thing that you have done, then the idea of just focusing on time as if we are workers in a steel mill, with a time clock, that's the part that drives the younger generation crazy. They are saying, if I'm doing a good job and I can do it in 5 days and I delegate better than you do, and I'm more strategic and I use the tools that are now available in a way that you didn't, Dad, then you need to pay attention to that or risk losing them. But at the same time, remember your child is also a reflection of the generation the next generation coming up throughout the ranks of your employee group. And so you've got to get creative in terms of helping them to have a greater sense of work-life balance, because that's what's being expected more and more across the board. So bottom line, are they getting the job done? Are they producing the results you want? If they are, and they're doing it slightly different than you are, maybe the problem is on your side, and you need to back off a little bit.
Some real tough communication between father and his children as they're in business. What do you do? What do you advise? Guy's been in business, was a car salesman, never went to college, sold cars, saved money, saw an opportunity. Hyundai comes in the market, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 decades ago, and it gets a Hyundai franchise. Everything he
Yep.
knows about the car business, he learned firsthand. He didn't get a master's in business administration. He was there. His son
Right.
gets a master's in business administration, comes back, he's going to be part of the family business. All of a sudden, he's critical of what dad's done to build that business. How often does that happen, and how do you juggle that I brought my child in, and they think they know more than I do? And I know how it works because I've been here 50 years.
Sure. And truthfully, this is a daily kind of problem that happens all the time. The younger generation does need to learn to win the right to be heard. I think it's they're not going to, the older generation isn't going to listen to you until you do some of the things and have earned the right to speak your mind, etc. So are you showing up? Are you doing the things that you have, that the older generation wants, at least long enough to show that you really bring something to the table? All too often, the younger generation will start talking too fast, and before having won that right. I think the truth is, the older generation wants the creativity of the younger generation, wants that generation to be a part of it, and you need to, like crazy, be talking and communicating as opposed to just trying to win arguments. Are we collaborating, which the root word of that is co-labor? Are
Yes.
we collaborating together to come to some solutions, or are we just imposing our will and it's I'm going to win or you're going to win? In which case, family harmony breaks down and business breaks down. So I think there's no easy solution to this, and the people constantly find fault with it. But I think the best answer to it is, are you willing to think through what can we expect of each other, and why am I expecting that of you if I'm the older generation? Am I just doing it? The last thing the younger generation wants to hear is, this is the way we've always done it.
Yes. Yes.
That's a recipe for disaster.
What happens? I'm going to take this a step further. I'm running the business. My son comes in. My son is Ryan. My name is Rick because that's my name. How does he address me? Do they do like, am I dad? Am I Rick when he's talking in front of other people? How do you address the differences? You've got a head of a family, and you've got the children.
Sure. Every family's a little different on this. I've been in lots of situations where dad is called dad by his kids who are working in the business, and everybody understands that and doesn't worry about it. In other situations, they're more comfortable with using their their first name, and I think you just have to talk about it. What are you comfortable with? Because each family does operate a little bit differently in terms of how formal they are or how informal they are. I don't know that there's a rule of thumb that works, but I would certainly talk about it and say, what are we comfortable with?
So if you're comfortable with, hey, dude, that works. Whatever works in the family that everybody agrees on. Maybe not.
Work.
Maybe not. That doesn't make for a very...
be a little respectful, right?
Yeah, not a very impressive name tag either. So I guess you better stick with something else. I'm going to take a few seconds here at the end. Give one piece of advice for long-term success. What would that be? Just one. You've got 30 seconds with these people. What would you tell them?
I basically say that you need to define what success really is to you. And to me, it's twofold. It's family harmony and business success. It's not one or the other. If you don't have both, in my opinion, you need to be working harder at one or the other. So you can always make more money, but you can't always repair relationships. So I believe that there are 5 things that help families work well together. First of all, everybody on the team, every family member has earned respect. We didn't just hand it to them. They did earn their place on the team. There's a commitment to the family vision. We know what's important to us as a family. As one guy said, we know how to work through the issues because we know what Grandpa's vision is, and we're continuing to carry it out. There's an ability to resolve conflict. If you don't have that, all you've got is artificial harmony. And then clarity regarding what's expected of each other, as I've talked about on numerous occasions, being very granular about that, talking very specific about what I need from you, what you need from me. And then finally, again, that commitment to spending time together discussing business. where we talk, where we shut off the rest of the world and we talk through what are our issues, what do we need to be focused on, what do we need to be dealing with, etc. And all too often, I remember one young man saying, Dad's handed me the baton and wants me to run the business, but I need him around more than the general manager who preceded me, who was much more experienced than I. And Dad's off playing golf or doing other things, etc. I need more of his time. So first and foremost, and I want to start and end with this, prayer. It's tough being in a family business.
Yes.
Business is supposed to be all about family is supposed to be about unconditional love and acceptance. I love you just because you're you. Business is conditional performance. So when you get those together, you're going to need some prayer to work through those differences. If you do, then the families that do those things are going to achieve family harmony, business success, which we call succession success. And my prayer is that that will happen in your family.
Well, it's interesting because you deal with this on a daily basis. All of the aspects you talk about, Hugh deals with on a daily basis. Our guest on the program has been Hugh Roberts. His book is called Help, I've Got Family in the Business. Hugh is a certified financial planner, certified succession planner. The book, Help, I've Got Family in the Business, available wherever books are sold. Hugh's website, seekingsuccession.com. The book available wherever books are sold. I would like to thank ChristianWorksMedia.com. Dream big to succeed. They arranged our conversation with you today. It's been fun, covered a lot of ground here, Hugh. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
It has been a pleasure to have Hugh Roberts on the program today. You're listening to This Week in America, and we're back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.